Hey everybody, this is Will and welcome to part 4 of our 5-part series all about building a worship set of multiple songs in Ableton Live. Now in part 1 of this series, I showed you how to apply the 3-part framework for using tracks. This is the same process and framework that I created years ago that's used by artists traveling the world playing giant stadiums all the way to worship leaders in small mobile church setups, using Ableton Live in a way to quickly format songs and quickly build sets. In part 2, I showed you how to use Ableton Live, not just as a thing to run tracks, but as a tool for leading worship, how to create great transitions, fade between songs, and get really precise on exactly how you want those transitions, as well as using drone pads in your Ableton Live set. And in part 3, I showed you some advanced tips and tricks on using a virtual MIDI bus to help create some great transitions and how to stop, have Ableton Live automatically stop, and have Ableton Live automatically stop and select your next song. Now to see those previous videos in the series, check out the links in the description below. In this video, part 4, we're going to talk about actually using Ableton Live on stage. There's a couple things we have to talk about that's going to help us bring all this together. We're going to kind of start to see the fruits of our labor in this particular video. Today's video is going to be a little shorter than the other ones, which is great. We need a bit of a break because we've got a lot coming in part 5. So here's our goal. We want to make this as effortless and as unattentive as possible. What I mean by that is when I use Ableton Live on stage, I don't want to constantly be staring at my computer. I know some folks that set up their Ableton set in a way that in order for them to go from verse to chorus, they have to manually press a button. To go from chorus to their bridge, they have to press a button, and they're constantly staring at their computer. They're constantly involved. If that's you, if you believe doing more work is more valuable than doing less work and not being focused on this, then turn off this video now. If you're interested in doing this a long way and spending more time doing it, and that somehow makes you feel like you're doing it better, then this is not for you. So don't pay attention. So our goal is we want to do a lot of pre-work before we step on stage. And it's not a lot of work, but we want to do some pre-work before we step on stage so that when we step on stage, we have freedom and flexibility and we're not stressed and we're not worried. Okay, so let's talk about using tracks on stage. First thing we need to talk about is getting audio out of our computer. The easiest way to do this is to use a cable like this. This is the Hosa CMP, I believe this is the 153. This is the smaller version of this. And we can plug this cable into our computer, and then we can take the other side of this cable and split it to where we have click going out of one side and tracks going out of our other side. And that can go into direct boxes, which can then go to our front of house console. And then in our console, that's where we want to adjust it so that we only hear click in our ears. And if we have guide, we hear guide in our ears. And then at front of house, the only thing the congregation hears is just tracks, right? So using the Hosa CMP-153, that's a great solution if you want a very low cost way to run and use tracks. But I prefer using a audio interface. In this example, I've got my Play Audio 12 from iConnectivity set up here. The reason I enjoy using an audio interface is this has actually 12 outputs. So you can see 10 outputs here. The headphone output on the front here, there we go, as we get in focus, is 11 and 12. So I can have 12 outputs from my interface. And the benefit that this gives me is I can separate my tracks going to front of house so that I have separation of these. I could do pads, do whatever, however I want to separate this. But using an audio interface like this is what's going to make that possible. It's going to take us to the next level when we're running tracks, going from just using the headphone output to using an actual audio interface like that. But let's talk about how we actually do this on stage. How do we make this happen on stage? Here's the benefit of doing the 3-part framework for using tracks. We've been talking about this. When we formatted all our songs, we did all of our audio routing. So look at my set here. If I go into my set, we've got our return tracks set up here, 4 return tracks. We go into each of our songs. We've already done the pre-work. Again, that's the key. Do the pre-work before you step on stage so that all your tracks are routed to return tracks. Now I've got my interface set up. I've got 10 outputs, but I've got 4 return tracks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make these stereo pairs. So here's all I do when I step on stage to set up my audio interface. I'm going to open Ableton Live. I plugged in my Play Audio 12. I'm going to go to Preferences, which is Command, comma. I'm going to go to Audio, and then under Audio Output Device here, I'm going to select Play. configuration just to show you what I've got here. I've already got all my stereo outputs set up, mono outputs set up here. Okay. And this is what you do at stage one using your template. So I've already done all this work. Again, I did the pre-work, but I'm just showing you what those outputs look like. Now I'm going to go over to my return tracks here and I'm going to say audio 2, external out. Let's do 3 and 4. And for this, let's do external out 5 and 6, external out 7 and 8. And external out 9 and 10. The nice thing about this is technically this part here, routing my return tracks to my interface, I've done already at my template. The very first stage that I'm working with my template, I've routed my audio to my template. I'm showing you in this example though, this is the only routing I have to do because all this is already done. Again, in our songs, there's our routing. Our sends are going to return tracks. Now our return tracks are going to outputs. And then from there, we're going to take and plug our audio interface to our stage snake, if you have that on stage. And then that's going to go back to our soundboard. And then again, that's where we're going to separate our click and guide from the rest of our content. We want to make sure at our soundboard that we've turned down our click and guide in the house and we just have tracks going. Okay, so step one is setting up our audio interface. That's all you have to do. The benefit of only doing that, and the reason we're able to do all that is we've used the 3-part framework for using tracks to basically pre-do all our audio routing. Now, the next step is to implement something like this. This is a MIDI controller here. I want to use a MIDI controller so that, again, I'm not staring at my Ableton set the whole time. I'm not constantly looking at this and stressed and trying to get everything working just the way I need to. So in this case, I'm going to use the Oakboard Mini. And you could use a foot controller like the Looptimus. The Oakboard has the 4 Vista, which is a great solution if you're looking for a foot controller. But I want to use a MIDI controller for a couple different reasons. One, I want to make sure that I don't look like I'm checking my email on stage. I want to stay focused on leading worship. I want to stay focused on the moment, interacting with the congregation. I don't want to be focused on, again, staring at Ableton Live, make sure I've got the correct song going. And I don't want to make an overly complicated setup. So here's what we've got. We've got our MIDI controller set up, connected to Ableton Live. Here's what's really nice about this. I'm without going to do any mapping whatsoever. I'm going to just go and press, let me show you my MIDI controller. I'm going to press stop on my controller here. Okay. So I'm going to press stop. That immediately takes me back to 1. I'm going to press play. And let's turn on follow so that we can see this. And you'll see that we're starting all the way at the beginning of our live set. Now I know you can't hear that, but that's perfectly fine. But that's starting all the way at the beginning of my live set. Again, I could press stop to stop this if I want. I could press play. I could hit next to jump between locators here. If I'm in my intro and I want to repeat that, then I could hit previous to repeat that really, really easily. And then again, finally, I'll press stop to stop that. Now, what's really cool about this is, yes, I'm using this MIDI controller, but you just saw me. I did not MIDI map anything on my MIDI controller, right? The reason I didn't MIDI map anything on my MIDI controller is, again, the 3-part framework for using tracks. When we first created our template, we did all our MIDI mapping to play, to stop, to previous, and to next. You can see all that MIDI mapping over here that was done. We did all that MIDI mapping at our template level, and we did it once so that when we step on stage, we're plugging in our computer, we just simply plug in our MIDI controller and it's ready to go. I press play. I have confidence that when I press play, it's going to work, which is great. So that's the benefit, again, of the 3-part framework for using tracks. This proven framework that's been used all over the world by probably at this point thousands and thousands of people, and it works, which is great. But now let's actually talk about using this on stage. We've set up our audio interface. We've set up our MIDI controller, foot controller, a MIDI controller like the Oakboard Mini, whatever you're using, a keyboard, however you're using to control it. Let's actually talk about how do we use this on stage? What's the process of doing this? So I'm going to open Ableton Live up here. First thing I'm going to do when I step on stage using tracks, I'm going to go to my MIDI controller and I'm going to press stop twice. So by pressing stop twice, what that does is that resets my live set back to the beginning. Okay. So now with my live set back at the beginning, I'm going to press play on my MIDI controller. Okay. I'll take you back to live. So when I press play, that is running. Everything is going. Everything's working the way it should. Now, this is just, I'm just going to kind of let this run on its own. Again, I know you guys can't hear that. That's okay. Just visually kind of seeing that is all you need at the moment. So that's going to continue to play. Again, the goal for me when I'm on stages, I want this to be as hands-free as possible. So what's nice about this, if I take you back to the set, I did not have to interact with my live set to get this to go from the intro to the verse. And I'm not going to have to interact with my live set to go from the verse to the chorus. That's one of the big reasons why I suggest using arrangement view as opposed to session view. Is session view, I have to do work to get from the verse to the chorus to the bridge if I have chopped up my clips, which is what most people do to get flexibility. In arrangement view, I just hands off, and we're in the chorus, right? Which is really, really great. But what's nice about this, let's say, and we'll talk about next week how to have spontaneity and freedom and flexibility with tracks. But let me just kind of hint at this briefly. Let's say I want to repeat this chorus. Then what I'm going to do is go to my MIDI controller here. I'm going to press previous. And when I press previous, that's going to jump me back to the beginning of the chorus. Okay. It's going to wait till the next downbeat of 1 based on global quantization here. And again, we'll dive into this all next week as we talk about being spontaneous with tracks, which is such a big thing for worship leaders. But because of the way our MIDI controller is mapped and set up, all we have to do is, again, just press previous and we'll repeat. If for some reason I want to jump from my chorus to say verse 1, then I'm going to press next. Okay. And we'll go to there, and that's going to jump us to verse 1, which is really, really great. So again, we are just going to press play on our MIDI controller. It's going to play as our song is playing. We're just going to let it go. If we need to repeat, we can hit previous. If we need to jump ahead, we can hit next. And it's really, really simple, easy interactions. Now let's talk about the end of our song. Let's talk about what happens here. This is because of some work we did last week. We get some really, really cool benefits. So let me take you back into live, and let's jump to the end of our song here. We're going to go to this tag. We'll go to this locator here. So we'll jump to this tag. We're going to let it play. We'll get our transition. Again, I know you can't hear it, but just visually watch this for a moment. And because I did all this pre-work last week where we talked about some advanced things and using a virtual MIDI bus, I'm going to get to the end of this song. I've thought about my transition, what I want to have happen. I'm going to get to the end of the song, and it's going to stop. And look what it did. It automatically selected my next song, which is great. So at the end of my song, I could decide between one of our 4 types of transitions. I could keep going. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. I'll remove this. I could just stop, which we did stop here, but we added our 3rd type of transition, which is stop and go to the next song. Here's why that's so powerful. Let's say we do song 1, then we're going to talk, we're going to read scripture, we're going to do something, have a call to worship type moment. Then when I'm ready to go to my next song, all I have to do on my MIDI controller, I'm not selecting a song. All I'm going to do is press play, and I'll show you what that looks like in live. When I press play, we start right on song 2, and song 2 is going to roll through as needed. So what's really, really nice about this is it's a real simple decision. I'm not looking at a MIDI controller and selecting 3 and pressing play. I'm just pressing play. I've done the pre-work to go from song 1 and get us from song 1 into song 2. And I've decided I'm going to stop and select song 2. So again, it's really, really easy to navigate my set really simply with my MIDI controller, just using play, stop, previous, and next. I have the flexibility to jump around. And then again, I can stop at the end of my song and just press play. So if we set up our live set correctly, if we do the pre-work properly, then the only thing we're really doing on stage is just pressing play to go to the next song. Maybe at the end of our set, well, I would say at the end of our set, we could press stop, but we're going to program a stop there. So we're really only pressing play if everything goes to plan. And if we need to repeat, then again, we can press previous or next to repeat. Now let me jump you back to our live set here. I'm going to actually stop this for a second. Let's go between song 2 and 3. And let's say this is a transition where we just wanted to keep going. Again, this is something that we get for free in arrangement view that we don't get in session view. Let's say we're playing the end of our song here. I'm not going to interact with it. I'm not going to press my MIDI controller. Song 3 is going to automatically start without me interacting at all. Again, this is a big reason why I encourage worship leaders, if you're going to use tracks, do it in a view that's linear, that goes from left to right, to where we for free just get the ability to play and just automatically go throughout our content. Don't do crazy math to try to figure out how many beats and bars and measures you have to play a clip before you go to the next clip. Just go from song 2 to song 3 automatically. So we've talked about a keep going transition, which we just looked at. We talked about if we get to the end of the song, we want to just stop. That's like, let's say at the end of our set here, end of song 3, we've set up stop and go to next, but let me just copy this stop clip here. Let's set it up to where we get to the end of our very end of our set before we walk off stage. Don't try to remember to press stop. Like in case you have something after that, drag your stop clip in and that's going to automatically stop for you, which is great. So again, as a reminder, the way that we did that is we used our virtual MIDI bus. And we use our virtual MIDI bus and assign that to stop on our transport in Ableton Live. And the nice thing is, and I'll link to a tutorial below, stop on my MIDI controller works as well too. So I've got it set up to where stop and that stop clip in my live set are both functioning as the same note. So I've created this really hands-free, hands-off kind of scenario to where I really have the flexibility again to step on stage, double click, stop, press play. And if I've done the work to decide on my transitions between keep going, stop, and go to next. And the next week we'll talk about our fourth transition type, which is flow or a loop at the end of a song. I've decided all of that. Then really, again, in a perfect scenario, I just press play. That's all I do. I select song 2. I press play if I've got to stop and go to next transition selected. That's really simple and easy to navigate. Again, I have previous and next to jump around, have flexibility and freedom if I want. But let's talk about one final thing here. Let's say I step on stage. I go to start my set. I double click to press stop. And for some reason, we suddenly decide let's do song 2 instead of doing song 1. So instead of starting with song 1, let's go ahead and do song 2. Now, what do I do? Because on my MIDI controller here, I don't have my songs mapped, right? I just have play, stop, previous, and next. Now I do have these 2 additional buttons. If I wanted to map song 2, song 3 here, I could. But what if you have a set of, I don't know, 5, 6 songs? I've run out of buttons here. So what do I do in that case? Well, in that case, I've got my keyboard set up on my Mac to where it's really, really simple. Watch this. If I want to go to song 2, let's kind of zoom in here to where you can see. So we're at the beginning of our set on 1 there. Let's press play. Okay. So let's say I double click, let's go to song 2. I press 2 on my keyboard and that jumps me to song 2. I press 3 on my keyboard. That's going to jump me to song 3. I press 1 on my keyboard and that's going to jump me to song 1. I don't have to do key assignment. Why? Because of the 3-part framework. We did that at the very beginning in our template where we key assigned 1 on our keyboard to song 1, 2 to locator 2, and 3 to locator 3, which is again, incredibly powerful. So even when we step on stage, we can have the flexibility to adjust our song order. And yes, if you have a MIDI controller that has more options than this, more buttons, you could for sure map that. But I like to keep things really, really simple. And I keep that on my computer keyboard in case I need to interact with it. And if I don't need to interact with it, then my live set's just set and ready to go. So now, if you want some help to make that happen, you want this to speed up this process, you keep hearing me talking about the 3-part framework for using tracks and you're going, but Will, how do I get a template? How do I get my content to look like this? Then head to FromStudioStage.com/template. You can download my template, tracks template, completely for free. And it's a great way for you to get started. You can use it to format your songs and to build your sets. Now, I want to show you how we can be spontaneous with tracks, how we can have flexibility to jump around our song sections. I also want to talk about that 4th transition type, which is what I call a flow or looping transition. That's where we get to the end of our song. And instead of stopping and selecting our next song or keep going into our next song, we're going to actually just loop at the end of the song. And that's a great moment to have some spontaneity, to have some freedom and flexibility in that moment. And then we'll talk about how to jump back in the song, how to get out of that moment to our next song. But I want to show you that next week. So in order to see that, you've got to subscribe to the channel. Really important to hit the bell icon and enable notifications, turn notifications on so you see precisely when I release that video so that you make sure you don't miss it. You're one of the first people in the world to see that video premiere, to get that knowledge. It's going to be super, super important. So thanks for watching. Stay tuned for next week as we talk about that flow transition. And I also am going to announce something that I've been teasing that's completely for free, something I've never done before publicly for free, that you're not going to want to miss. And to see that, you have to check out part 5 of this series. So thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week for part 5. Take care, everybody. Bye.